Hey friends, it's time for a plant room tour. Hi, my name is Laura and I am here today because my houseplants survived the grayest Canadian winter and they asked for a houseplant tour as a reward. They would love your attention today. Some of them are doing a little rough. In this cozy little plant room, I've got some Philodendron, Alocasia, Hoya, Begonia, anthurium, succulent, cacti, and they would just love to be shown off in a houseplant tour. I'm gonna just go around the room, talk about all of my plants, talk about how they're doing. If that sounds like a good time, stay tuned. I'm gonna try to do this tour somewhat methodically so that I don't miss any plants. We're gonna start over here in this corner, go through this shelf, and then move this way. We're gonna start right at the tippy top of this shelf. This is my Hoya curtisii. This plant has been a very hardy Hoya for me. It is consistently putting out new growth and the new growth is adorable. I've had zero pest issues with this plant. It did not get the big sulfur treatment that a lot of my Hoyas got last year. And it is just growing. I feel like this is a Hoya that I might just have with me for life. I just have that feeling that it is basically indestructible. This plant did not grow a ton throughout the winter, which is pretty normal for a Hoya, but I did recently repot it. I feel like it is going to grow a lot this year. I am hoping that maybe this Hoya will bloom this year. It's quite mature, which I have found is the main contributor to a Hoya blooming, is when it has been around for a few years. As you can see, this plant gets about like medium light and it seems happy with that. It isn't a Hoya that needs like that bright light. I've said this in the past, but I really think that this Hoya is underrated. Compared to my other Hoyas, I don't always notice the new growth on this Hoya. I feel like it's kind of up and out of the way because it is so easygoing, and then it's just producing all these new leaves that I don't always notice. As you can see, it is getting quite long. I don't really have any plans to propagate this or anything. I'm just planning to get it as long and trailing as possible. I really love the shape of the leaves on this one. I love the color. It is just really a perfect Hoya, and I am so glad to be growing it. Underneath that one, we have my Hoya retusa. This guy is so cute. This is a Hoya that I probably wouldn't have bought, but it was gifted to me and I have really enjoyed growing it since having it. This one does bloom often. There's a little bloom right there. Having this Hoya retusa in the happy face pot has been a game changer for how much I love it. I was really a little bit on the fence about whether I liked it at all, but once it went in the happy face pot, which I found at a thrift store, it became so much more interesting to me because it looks like hair, it looks adorable, and you can't help but notice the plant because it's in such a cute planter. This plant really reminds me of some type of evergreen tree. It is such a weird, quirky plant, but very adorable, and the fact that it blooms really has won me over. Over here, oops, these two like to intertwine, which is very adorable. This is my Peperomia Hope. This plant continued growing through the winter with absolutely no problem, which surprised me. I always kind of think of Peperomias as needing tons of light, but it was fine through the gray winter. It just kept putting out new growth. I did repot this right before the winter, so maybe it just really appreciated having the extra space. This is a pot that I made, and I think it just really suits the happy, joyous look of the Peperomia Hope. I've had this Peperomia Hope, I would say, for about 4 years, and it is actually 2 plants combined into one pot. I got them both at the grocery store, and it has done very well for me. I have found the secret to a happy Peperomia Hope is to just not water it until it is very dry. I treat it like a succulent. I underwater it. I let it get really dry until the leaves are shriveled, and then I water it, and then it perks right back up and continues to grow. These guys are really susceptible to root rot, and they are very happy to live on the extra water they store in their leaves if you forget to water them. When I first started having houseplants, I found Peperomia really difficult to keep alive. They would only live for a few months and then croak. But now that I just wait until it's super dry before watering, it is happy and putting out tons of new growth, and overall just a really cute plant. Moving down the shelf, I have this terrarium with my Labesia dino skin inside. This plant is so weird. It is basically black with this reptilian texture. I've been keeping this plant in a terrarium because all the resources that I've looked at have said that it will do best in terrarium, but it does seem fairly hardy. I feel like if you had a very humid house, it would do okay. But my house is pretty dry, so I'm gonna just keep it in the terrarium, see how big I can get it. There is a new little leaf emerging at the top, which is so cute. I imported this plant from Indonesia and I was not really sure what to expect. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to keep it alive, but it has done really well. I've had it for about a year. I've really enjoyed growing it. I've got a little bit of moss and some string of turtles in the terrarium as well, just to keep it company. It is a very strange plant, but I do love strange plants. It kind of reminds me of kale, but weirder. Next up, I have my Cebu Blue, and it is doing amazing. It's got this really long tendril coming out. This is a very, very long trailing plant, but it looks small and bushy because I have pinned the vines back into the soil. They were getting really leggy, and at one point it dropped a ton of leaves just because of winter. So I decided to pin things back in, and they haven't necessarily rooted back into the soil, I don't think. But the plant overall just looks healthier and cuter when it's bushy like this instead of long and leggy and missing leaves. I'm hoping that this long tendril means that the other ones are about to shoot out new growth as well. I would love to have this as a long trailing plant coming off of this shelf. I've had this plant for about 2 years, and for the first year it did not do a lot at all. It did not grow a lot. I think it just was not necessarily happy with whatever conditions I was giving it. But I have since just learned to ignore it, basically just let it do its thing. I water it when it starts to look limp. Other than that, I just ignore it. It's not getting a ton of light, but it's getting enough light to grow, which is great. I think it's such a nice little contrast of color compared to my other plants, and I have really learned to love this guy. Right behind it, I have a plant that is not as happy. This is my Philodendron Brandy, and I recently took this out of my greenhouse cabinet because it had thrips, and I had it growing up a small trellis. I now have it trailing, and I did snip off the ends, hoping to propagate them and put them back in the soil. They are right here. They are in perlite in a jar that I just stuck in this cute cover pot that I made. I'm hoping that as a trailing plant, I will enjoy this plant more. I really did not enjoy it on a trellis. I felt like I was constantly expecting it to size up, and it does not size up. I don't know what I'm doing wrong or if it's just a different type of plant that I have, but Philodendron Brandy has not sized up in my experience. That's okay. I think it would be really beautiful as a trailing silvery plant if I can get it to thrive. I found that it did a lot better in the greenhouse than it did just outside in my living room, but I'm not willing to have a plant that occasionally has thrips in my cabinet. I'm not that person. I'm not gonna do it. If it dies out here, that would be sad, but gotta do what you gotta do. I think this could be a very beautiful trailing plant. We'll see if it gets there. If it doesn't get there, I did try my best. I've had this plant, I think, for 3 years, trying to grow it in different conditions, trying to get it to size up. I tried it on a moss pole. I tried everything to make it look like the beautiful brandies that I've imagined, but it just doesn't want to go there. And maybe it had thrips that whole time. I didn't really see any thrips, but who knows? Who knows what's going on? I am hopeful though, with spring, with the warmer temperatures, we'll see a little bit of growth. Hopefully these do root up, and maybe I will have a cute trailing plant someday. On the next shelf down, I have my Philodendron Dark Lord. I have been trying to baby this plant a little bit more. I looked back at footage of how it looked when I got it, when I imported it, and it was so much bigger, so much more beautiful. It had really, really big dark leaves. I did take tons of cuttings, and I am now paying the price because it really has reverted to its juvenile form. I am hoping this spring, this is one of my goals, to get it a little bit bigger, get it to grow up this bamboo stake, and get it back to its former glory. It's getting quite a bit of light because I have a grow light right here that's off right now, but it does get quite a bit of light now. It wasn't getting a ton of light for a long time. I kind of fell out of love with this plant. I kind of forgot about it, but now I am on a mission to get it to size up, to get it really beautiful. I don't see any leaves starting at the moment. This leaf came out, I don't know, maybe a month ago. It's cute, but definitely not the big heart-shaped leaves that this plant can produce. So hopefully in the coming months we can get some new growth going, get this plant looking a little bit better. It's looking rough, but it was a hard winter, and what can you do? Right beside, I have my Pilea baby tears. This plant is doing surprisingly well. When I first got it, which was only, I don't know, a couple months ago, it dropped a ton of leaves, and I think it was just kind of adjusting to the conditions in my house. I try to keep the soil moist all the time, and it seems to like that. I kind of treat this like it's moss, which I know it's not moss, but it kind of reminds me of moss, just the way it grows, the way it just kind of takes over the pot and then spills over. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with this plant, because I think as it trails, it's gonna get kind of leggy and weird looking, and maybe it's just one of those plants that you need to keep cutting back to keep it looking cute. I have taken multiple cuttings of this and put it into my terrariums. It's done really, really well in my terrariums. It's a really cute little like filler for some of the bald spots in my terrarium. So I'm really appreciating this. I love the color of this plant. We'll see though. I am very encouraged by the fact that it's not dropping leaves anymore, and it doesn't seem to need a ton of light. It seems happy where it is. This was given to me by a good friend for my birthday, so I want to keep it as healthy as possible. On the bottom shelf, I have this sad little pot, but there is more going on in here than you might see. This is one of my Philodendron gloriosums, and I did cut it because it was growing right out of the pot. I did cut it, and then I took a propagation. The propagation is pinned right there. They both don't look like a lot. However, there is new growth coming out right there. And okay, maybe there's not any growth on the propagation. I thought there was for a moment. Like, doesn't that might be. That might be a growth point activating. It's hard to know, honestly. I'm just happy that it is still alive. When I propagated it, it seemed totally fine, but then the leaves sort of just went downhill. So I think maybe it was just too much shock for the plant, but it is still alive. The stem and the propagation are not squishy or anything. I think I just need to be patient. Again, it's been a really gray winter, so probably not the best time to chop a really giant plant, but I did it, and here we are. I'm hoping with the warmer temperatures, we will just see some new growth. I'm hoping that this growth point continues to grow into a petiole, into a leaf. We will see though. It is here. It's getting some light from this grow light. It's kind of here out of the way because it is so ugly at the moment. And then over here, sort of hidden beside some plant care things, is my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma pot. And inside the pot, there's tons of propagations. I am hoping to fill this out a little bit more, because as you can see, the stem is so bald until we get to the top. I don't know what is going on. I don't know if it's just because those are the older leaves. Up here, it's super full. We have tons of leaves. It looks so pretty. This is one of my favorite things going on in this room. It looks so beautiful and lush. And then I just kind of try to ignore this stem. I don't know what it is. It is getting some light, but I don't know. It just seems to be focusing only on the top part of the plant. But there is tons of propagations in here. They just haven't quite taken off yet. But once they do, hopefully they will just fill in all of these bald areas. We're gonna move over here to this bottom shelf. This is mostly Hoyas. We're gonna start with my Hoya carnosa compacta. This plant is in another homemade plant pot of mine. Now, this plant, I cannot actually pinpoint any new leaves or any new growth points. I can't find any, but every time I look at it, it looks fuller. It looks like it's growing. I don't know, maybe there's leaves growing in amongst the leaves, like on the stem, so I don't notice them as much. I'm not sure, but overall, I think this plant is growing, I think. I did repot this plant recently. It was fairly root bound. I'm hoping that that will boost some growth this spring. This plant did get the sulfur treatment. It seems to have enjoyed it. It's hard to know really, but it does look like it's growing. I really hope that someday, maybe in like 20 years, I have one of those huge cascading pots of Hoya carnosa compacta. I feel like everyone would like that. I'm really happy with the amount of stems coming out of the pot. I feel like it does have the potential to be a really full plant. I was briefly very interested in getting the variegated version of this plant, but then I heard that it grows even slower than the all green version, and the all green version really grows quite slowly for me. So I'm gonna just stick with the all green version for now until I kind of unlock the power to make it grow faster. Until then, I have no business getting the variegated version. But it is cute, even though it's small, it is really cute. I love it. I feel like it is a nice anchor to this shelf because it does really draw the eye in this pot, and I think it's looking good. All of these plants on this shelf get a lot of light. This grow light is very powerful. It has actually burnt a few plants and I've had to move them out of this area, but all of these plants seem to really like the intense full light. And here we have my Hoya carnosa Crimson Queen, another favorite basic Hoya of mine. I recently chopped some cuttings, rooted them, and put them in to make an even fuller pot. This plant, again, I can't see any new leaves, but it's just looking healthy. It's looking ready to grow. This plant did go through the sulfur treatment. It seemed to enjoy the sulfur treatment. I am now awaiting all of the miraculous growth that is apparently going to happen after treating a Hoya with sulfur. I love this plant all the time, but I will say that I love when there is some pink on it. There is like the tiniest little pink tip here. This is the newest leaf that came in. The pink is only on the new leaves, so we are waiting. We are waiting patiently for some new growth. I would just love for it to explode this spring and have some big bursts of pink. Hopefully it happens. Hopefully you can do that for me. This is Haworthia cooperi, and it has translucent leaves. They look like tiny crystal balls and they just glow. I adore this succulent, and I know it looks really tiny right now, but it has actually grown a lot. I've had to up pot it 3 or 4 times in the last 2 years. And when I got it, it was like this big. It was like the size of a large button. So all of the leaves out here are new, and it is really happy. It gets tons of light, like I said. This is just such a magical plant. If you see one, I really do recommend getting one. I find they don't always look that great in the nursery because it doesn't have, you know, natural light coming through it. But when this plant is in the window or just getting lots of light from the grow light, it is absolutely stunning. I've got this in one of my favorite tiny pots. This is from Terrestrial, and I feel like it really flatters the colors in the succulent. I think they make a very cute little combo. Right beside, this is my newest cactus. This is a rat tail cactus, and it is a pink tipped rat tail cactus, but actually since bringing it home from the nursery, the pink tips have kind of disappeared. I'm not sure what's going on with that because it is getting a ton of light. I assume pink tips kind of come with the light, so I'm not sure why that pink has faded. There's not much I can do about it. I did repot it when I brought it home. I don't know that it absolutely needed a repot, but I would like this cactus to grow quite fast. I am looking forward to having it trail down, which is kind of the appeal of a rat tail cactus. I would also love to get this cactus to bloom someday, but that's probably unrealistic to expect that to happen this summer, but you never know. Right beside, in another terrestrial pot, this is my Hoya renuensis. And as I say about all of my Hoyas, this is one of my favorite Hoyas. I don't see any new growth happening at all, but the leaves are healthy. Overall, this plant is doing well. I did import this plant from Indonesia. I find sometimes imports take like 2 years to really get going. I'm just happy to have it looking like this. I think it's really stunning. It's beautiful. I did have this in the cabinet for a really long time, but it didn't really do anything in there. So I figured why not take it out and give it even more light out here. The pros of the cabinet is that it's really humid. The cons is that the light is slightly less than this shelf. This shelf is like the ultimate light area. So plants that I think need maximum light go here. So even though there's not a ton of humidity, this shelf can be better for Hoyas because they're getting tons and tons of light. So maybe you can see, but there is a back row to this shelf. The plants in the back are still beloved plants, but they're kind of plants that are struggling or just I don't feel like putting them on spotlight as much. I've talked about this plant quite a few times, and every time I talk about it, I say I'm gonna get rid of it, and then I don't. This is my Philodendron Paraiso Verde or Paraiso Verde, I'm not sure. As you can see, it does not have the characteristic variegation that Paraiso Verde apparently has. When I imported it, it had beautiful, huge leaves. It had beautiful variegation, but I have not been able to get that variegation back. But I haven't given up on it, and I have kind of just come to accept that this is how it looks. It does look cute. It's getting tons of light and there's no variegation. This is just what this looks like. I have kind of just come to appreciate the shape of the leaves, the fact that it's here, it doesn't die, it is very, very hardy, and it can take a ton of light, which is not characteristic of all philodendrons. So I like it there. It kind of fills in the back side of the shelf. I'm not sure that it will show up on camera, but there is a very subtle pink margin on the leaves, which I think is really pretty. Again, it's probably something that only I notice when I'm trying to appreciate something about this plant. It goes in the back. It could definitely be repotted soon, but I don't really need it to grow really big if it's not going to be variegated. So for now, it's back here. We'll see what happens this spring. I might move it into a warmer area of the plant room. Apparently, heat can really help accelerate the variegation. We will see. Here's my variegated Hoya carrii, and there are some growth points happening, but no new leaves in the past 6 months. This plant did go through the sulfur treatment. It didn't seem to really like it, but it didn't die at least, which did happen to my Hoya diekii. I did recently repot this plant, hoping that that will help encourage a little bit of growth. We will see. I'm hoping that it enjoys lots of light. So far, so good. It wasn't growing in the cabinet, so I'm just trying something else. The lack of growth on this plant is extreme. I have had this plant for 3 or 4 years, and it looks basically the exact same as when I got it. It's really an unsatisfying plant to grow because no matter what you do for it, it just doesn't grow. But it's back here. It is still really beautiful. I love the heart shapes. I do love this plant. I just find it really frustrating to grow. So it's back here so that I don't get frustrated every time I look at my plant shelf. This is my Hoya carnosa Crimson Princess, and this plant appeared to have root rot, so I did snip it and then root the cuttings and recently potted up the cuttings into this pot. I'm being really gentle with this pot right now because the cuttings are freshly repotted in there. They're probably not very secure yet. I'm hoping that this plant makes it. I was really sad to see that it had root rot. I think that with the sulfur treatment, I was kind of just overwatering because I kept having to rinse off the sulfur every week. That's what I'm assuming happened. Who knows, maybe I burnt the roots with the sulfur. But the cuttings do look healthy. I don't see any new growth points on them, but that's okay. They look healthy. We're gonna hope for the best. And here we have my Hoya Wyetii. This plant is really stunning. This plant is in the back because it's in a tall planter, not because I'm trying to hide it. This plant reminds me of string beans. I can't look at it without thinking of string beans. I think this planter really complements the growth pattern of the Hoya. And there has been some new leaves recently. They come in really dark, which is really cool. I really love the dark margins on this plant. I think this plant kind of gets looked over a lot because it is just a little bit basic when you first look at it. But the longer I grow it, the more I appreciate it. I think it's so unique. It's also really, really hardy as far as Hoyas go. It has given me absolutely no complaints. It just keeps growing, putting out new leaves and looking beautiful. And way in the corner is my Hoya macrophylla. Again, this is in the back more because it's sort of tall, not because I'm trying to hide it. We have some new cutie leaves coming in. There is tons of tendrils shooting out. I think this plant is gonna really explode this spring, which is very exciting. I hope that this variegation continues because this new leaf came in with absolutely no variegation, and I would like to have this beautiful creamy variegation. This leaf also didn't have a ton of variegation, but this one does. So I'm hoping that continues. That is why I put it under the really intense grow light, hoping to see a little bit more variegation and a little bit more growth. And it seems to have responded really well. It's just on this homemade trellis to keep it somewhat contained. It's not really that big, but I just thought it would look cute to fill in this trellis with the new leaves. Okay, onto the middle shelf. This shelf also gets quite a bit of light from this grow light, but not quite as much as the bottom shelf. Let's start with my Hoya publicalis, which has no cares in the world. It is doing so well. Keeps putting out these new dark leaves. I have hope, and I think it's a realistic hope, that this plant is going to bloom this year. It just has been putting out tons of growth and seems overall really happy. I've had this plant for about 4 years and it is one of my favorites still. I guess I say that about every single Hoya. All of my Hoyas are my favorite, but this one also is just really hardy. It doesn't complain, it just grows, which is what I thought Hoyas were supposed to do. The growth habit is kind of weird. It goes like forward instead of down. Like I would assume that it would trail down like this, but it just goes straight, which is really cool. It might have to do with the grow light too, I don't know. This one's very, very sweet, and this one is a Hoya publicalis purple Hawaiian, which apparently means that the blooms are purple. I really, really hope that it blooms this year. And while I have it out, I will grab this. This is one of my pickle jar begonias that I just started. This is a Begonia soli mutata in there. And the cool thing about Begonia soli mutata is the variegation gets deeper and deeper with the more light that it gets. So I'm hoping by having it here right under a grow light, we're gonna see some really interesting patterns. I have this plant in a couple terrariums and it does really create different looks depending on how much light it receives, which is really, really cool. As you can see, there's some Pilea baby tears in there as well and some string of turtles. I love creating little terrariums like this. It's sort of a cute little hobby that if there's nothing else going on with your plants, there's always something going on in a terrarium. I also just hate throwing out jars. Right beside is my Hoya tangamus. And this plant is a stunner. I've got this as well in one of my homemade pots. And there is some new growth coming out. There's a new little leaf right there. Maybe that's it, but that is really, really exciting. I imported this plant about a year ago and I wasn't sure how well it would do. This is definitely my largest leaf Hoya and I love the crusty edges. I feel like that is so unique. This new leaf does not look like it's going to be huge, but seeing as it's the first leaf coming out in my care, I'm just going to celebrate it anyway. It's okay if it's not huge. I'm just happy that this plant is growing and enjoying the conditions that I'm giving it. Even though I have a lot of Hoyas, I would not say that I treat them all exactly the same. I find that they do vary quite a bit in their needs, and this plant seems to really be happy in the conditions that I'm giving it, which is a pleasant surprise. This is what is left of my Hoya croniana super silver. This used to be a big trailing plant and then something happened to it. I'm still not entirely sure whether it was spider mites or thrips or some type of root rot, but from the time I took it home, it kind of slowly descended into an unhealthy plant. In the beginning, I thought maybe it was just adjusting to my home. Maybe there was something it was lacking, but it continued to decline. So I decided to cut my losses and just snip it, root it in water, and now it has been planted into soil. So far so good. There is no new growth, but the leaves look happy. They look healthy. I did cut off all the unhealthy growth when I snipped it. So far so good. I really hope this plant makes it. I was so excited to find it in the nursery because I have always wanted one, and then it just quickly declined. So it was really discouraging, but I do have hope. I'm hoping that spring brings some new growth, brings some beautiful new leaves for this plant. This is another Haworthia cooperi. This is a slightly different form. I'm not completely sure what the different names are for the two Haworthia cooperis, but they're both Haworthia cooperis. But this one, as you can see, has like pointier leaves and it is about to bloom. I am obsessed with this plant pot combo. I feel like this plant will always be in this pot unless it dies. I think they really go well together. As you can see, this plant also has the transparent leaves like the other Haworthia, but they're just a little bit pointier and they have little strings on the top, which is really weird. As far as succulents go, this guy is pretty happy and easygoing. He gets quite a bit of light and I water him when he looks a little bit shriveled, but other than that, he does really well. I did make this plant pot. I did make it especially for this plant, and it even has a drainage hole. I'm really proud of this creation, and I really think that these two look perfect together. This is my Xanthosoma lindenii or Caladium lindenii. I also made this plant pot. This plant has been surprisingly easy to grow as long as it's getting lots of light and I keep the soil fairly moist. It's consistently putting out new leaves. I got this plant as a rescue plant for $1. I think it got cold damage or something and it was down to 1 leaf and I wasn't sure if I could rescue it. Caladiums are really, really finicky. But here we are. That was about a year ago that I rescued it and I'm hoping that it will just keep on putting out new leaves. Unlike a few other caladiums that I have grown, this one does not necessarily lose a leaf when it produces a new leaf. It kind of just hangs on to all of its leaves, which is really a testament because caladiums can be really finicky and just refuse to have more than 2 leaves. I really like how this plant kind of fills in the back of this shelf. It kind of makes it look a little bit more full and tropical and overall gives it a very fun vibe. This is a Crassula spiralis, and I'm sure you can see how it got that name. I have grown the Buddha's Temple succulent, which is really similar, but a little bit bigger. This one is more petite. I love how complicated the patterns are on this plant. I've got it in this little teeny tiny plant pot. I think it looks so perfect. It looks like a little bouquet of flowers, and I have been really enjoying this since bringing it home. It's just a really cute little addition to this plant shelf. Now in the very back here, I am propagating some succulents. I have a really big succulent planter at work and I took some cuttings and I just have them propagating in this little bowl of soil. You can see it's rooting right into the soil. Succulents are so fun to propagate. I don't think this one's gonna make it, but it was worth a try. These ones too, I don't know. There is tiny little roots emerging, but we'll see. I thought it was worth trying. The succulents needed to be pruned anyway, so why not try to grow a couple more? Now this guy I would say is my pride and joy as far as succulents go. This is my Burrow's tail and it is doing so well. Wait till I show you the top. The top has so many little babies just ready to pop out. This plant loves the grow light. I feel like I would not have anything close to this if I didn't have it under a grow light. I try not to touch this plant very much because it does drop leaves. It probably has dropped a couple leaves just while I'm talking. It really doesn't like to be moved. So if you want to get yours to grow really nice and long, find a good spot for it where it's getting a ton of light and then just do not touch it. Even when I water it, I try not to move it. I just like water it in its spot. It's so cool how it is trying to root. It is trying to find a new home. I don't know if eventually this will get too long to sustain itself. Given that it's throwing out all those aerial roots, I wonder if it needs to be pruned, but I just don't have the heart to prune it yet. I want to see how long I can get it. If it starts to get really leggy and spindly, of course I will prune it, but for now, it is looking beautiful. The ends are really nice and full still. I think overall I'm doing a good job. This little section is my favorite. There's like a stem coming here, but there is a stem shooting off there. It's gonna fork into 2 stems, which is so cool. And at the very back, this is not much to look at, but a while ago I tried to grow some blue oil ferns from some spores that I bought online. So far there really isn't anything. I did reach out to the seller and the seller said to give it more light, which was the opposite of what I had been doing. I was under the impression that the spores wanted more like, not darkness, but not really bright light. The seller said, no, give it tons of light. So I'm trying it under the grow light. We'll see. I wonder if it's almost too late because this was quite a few months ago that I started them. But I've got them in the back of the shelf. No harm in just keeping them there and hoping that something happens. Onto this top shelf. I already talked about my Philodendron brandy propagations. This is also a recent propagation, believe it or not. This is my Philodendron ploumanii propagation. Philodendron ploumanii is so huge, so obviously this is really big. This is another plant pot that I made and I think it works really well for plants with really long petioles like the ploumanii. That way it's not drooping down because the pot kind of supports it. The stem is right there. You can see inside I do have a pot, inside a cover pot, inside another cover pot. I was so happy that I was able to propagate the ploumanii because the ploumanii was getting very big and I wanted to have more of them. I'm still not sure if I'm going to keep Both plants, I am really enjoying having two of them. They are growing in different ways. I'll show you the other one eventually, of course. I am enjoying having both of them, so I might just keep both of them. I think this plant will look really interesting as it fills out this pot. I think this is a really good combo. And I'm just so impressed as to how quickly this plant started growing again after propagating it. Propagating plants for the first time is not always successful, at least for me. Sometimes plants are just really stubborn and difficult to propagate. I had no idea how the Plumania would do. I did take 2 cuttings. One of the cuttings did not make it, but this one is doing so well that it definitely was worth it to propagate, and I really love how this looks on the top shelf. This is another one of my little terrariums, and this one is very heavy on the Pilea baby tears. I'm hoping that the baby tears will fill in this whole area and kind of make that ghost look like it's surrounded by fog or something. That is my vision anyway. In the back, I have little tiny Philodendron soderoy, which kind of like the brandy, I thought would get a lot bigger, but continues to stay very tiny. So I'm trying to work with it. That's why it's in a terrarium. That way it can stay really miniature and fill in the back of the terrarium, kind of like a little tree behind the ghost. That is my vision for this terrarium anyway. I found this vase or vessel at a thrift store and I could not resist because I knew it would be perfect for a terrarium. So far I am in love with this terrarium and it hasn't even grown in yet. This is my Philodendron narrow or tiger tooth. If you've watched any of my older videos, this plant used to be massive. It was one of my biggest plants. It had huge leaves. The stem was super tall. And then I did not up pot it and we lost all the leaves and I had to propagate, and we are here now with this tiny plant, but I'm really happy with how it's looking. It is weird and small and the stem is really wonky, but it's cute. It's producing new leaves. I can't complain. And I'm hoping that eventually it will grow up and kind of fill in this area. When this plant was really big and really bushy, I had it in this exact same spot in the room. So I know that it enjoys this light and this kind of area to spread out. So I have high hopes for this plant. We'll see how long it takes to get to its former glory, but it is off to a really good start. And it looks cute as is. I've got a little alien in there guarding it. Overall, very happy with the recovery of this plant. And here we have my, Jose Buono mama plant. I did chop this one recently. Propagation is doing well. I'll show you that in a moment. And for a variegated plant, I would say that this plant grows quite fast. The new leaves that I've grown in my care have all been reasonably large and with the beautiful variegation. I kind of feel like the variegation looks similar to the variegation on the Paraiso Verde, but this is a way better option if you actually want the plant to remain variegated. I've had absolutely no issues growing this plant or maintaining the variegation. And as you can see, it's kind of just getting like medium bright light, not anything extreme or anything. I did make this pot as well. You can kind of see that it matches that other big pot that I've got the Plumania in. I'm not entirely sure how much this plant is going to grow upwards. And for now it's putting out new leaves. It seems happy, so I don't think it needs a pole anytime soon. This pot unfortunately cracked in the kiln. If you do pottery, you know how annoying that is. It was like absolutely perfect and then this happened in the kiln. I think it was a bit too thin. But anyway, love this plant. This is my string of hearts, and I'm actually growing her just in water in this little vase that I made. I feel like I'm saying that a lot in this tour, but I did. It started out kind of as an experiment to see if I could propagate my string of hearts because it was just looking really bald on top. And the propagations were putting out more growth than they were when it was in soil. So I decided to just keep growing it as is. I feel like it looks really pretty in a vase. To be perfectly honest, when I was growing this plant in soil, I really did not love it. I considered getting rid of it multiple times. It was always kind of bald on top, and multiple times I kind of strung it around and pinned it down to make it a fuller pot, and it just never looked good. It was healthy, it was fine, it was just not my cup of tea. But I do quite enjoy it in the vase. I feel like it just looks more interesting, and so I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it growing in water. If it dies because I'm growing it in water, I won't cry. Now this is a new Philodendron gloriosum. It is not related to the one I've had for years. This one I found at the garden center for like under $10 and it is great. It is putting out a new leaf. So far so good. I think this one is slightly different than the one I have. It does seem to have more veining. I think there is like a zebra gloriosum, which maybe that's what this is. Whereas my gloriosum usually was very, very dark and had less of the veining. So that's cool if they're different. I couldn't resist. And also when I bought it, I had already propagated that one and it had lost its leaves. So I was not sure if it was gonna make it. Since then, of course, it has put out the growth points. So I know it's fine, but for under 10 bucks, I picked it up and I thought worst case scenario, I'll grow it out and give it to a friend or something like that. For now though, it's just looking very cute. And who knows, I might just end up keeping both, especially if they are slightly different, especially if they are slightly different varieties, then why not have two gloriosums? Gloriosum is definitely one of my favorite philodendrons, so I'm happy to have two. And over in the corner here behind the armchair is my Philodendron Florida Green. And I'm hoping that this will just kind of fill in this corner. I had it before growing way up here and it was filling out that area really beautifully. I loved it, but it started to look kind of off balance or something. So I moved it here. It's doing really well so far. It's getting adequate lighting. It's just attached to like a bamboo stake. The bamboo stake is kind of attached to the grow light cord. It's a whole thing. I think it's okay though. I have propagated a couple stems that I cut from the top just to fill in that area. They're still rooting, but I think that will make it look a little bit fuller. And as it adjusts to this spot too, it will kind of turn to face the sun a little bit more. But I do think it looks good. It kind of accents this area, which I am going to talk about next. Now up here on the wall, I have three very beautiful plants. I think I do need to get them down to show them to you properly. Here is my Hoya Australis Lisa, and I actually forgot to feature this plant in my Hoya collection tour that I did recently. Because it's on the wall, it keeps growing and it looks beautiful, but I just don't really think of it as a Hoya, I guess, because most of my Hoyas are under the grow lights. She is doing fantastic. We've got a couple new leaves. I am hoping that she grows a lot this spring. I would love her to fill in that corner a little bit more. I don't expect her to trail all the way down to the floor, but it would be great if we just got a few more leaves just to make her look a little bit fuller. But overall, I love this plant. I really love the unvariegated Hoya Australis as well, but I apparently gave that plant root rot recently. So I am clinging to this plant. I'm taking really good care of her and fertilizing her and hoping that she grows really big really soon. But even at this size, she is really, really pretty and I love her. I have considered buying a couple more baby plants to fill her out a little bit more because she is just kind of like the perfect plant. Trailing, shiny, variegated, so beautiful. The new leaves on this one, when they have enough variegation, do come in pink. This one just faded away from pink and that is really, really exciting. Yeah, she's a favorite. Beside her hangs my Scindapsus exotica. And this is one of those plants that took me a while to really grow on me, to make me love it. But now I love it. I think it is so stunning. This year, my Scindapsus pictus did die. I'm not sure exactly why. I think it may have been a underwatering situation, or it was just the very gray winter. I'm not sure, but I did lose that Scindapsus, so this is now my only Scindapsus, but she's beautiful. I love her. Like the Australis Lisa, I would love her to trail a little bit more, but that I just need to be patient for. She seems to really like it up there. She's been putting out a couple new leaves. She doesn't seem to need like that extra bright light. She seems happy with just sort of dappled light, so that is great. It's a really good spot for her. When I originally put this plant up there, the lower leaves on the vines did die off. They were probably getting like zero light because this pot kind of covers the base of the vines. But other than that, it seems to really like that spot. So I'm very happy about that. And then the last of the trailing plants on the wall is my lipstick plant. I love this plant. She has been growing really, really fast for me. I might have to give her a haircut soon and just put the vines back in the top. There is some new vines starting at the top already, which is great. I am hoping that she blooms this year. For some reason, last spring and summer, she did not bloom, which I found odd. I'm wondering if maybe she needed more fertilizer, although I feel like I was fertilizing her. But she seemed to just sort of focus on growing lots of vines and leaves, which is okay too. This plant just looks so romantic in that area. I feel like it fills it in really nicely. It adds some interest up on the top of the wall, and I really like it. I did buy this lipstick plant as a variegated lipstick plant, and it really isn't. Once in a while, there's a few little splashes of lighter green, but I don't even know if that's variegation. I think it just might be damage. So it's not variegated, but that's okay. It's still really beautiful, and I am really happy with how much she grew this year. And then I have the 3 plants in the back here behind the armchair. There's also some incense going. Hopefully you're not allergic. This is my Buono Propagation. It is looking amazing. And I originally took this propagation to sell. I don't know, guys. I don't know if I'm gonna sell it because it looks so perfect. There is a new leaf coming in, and it is growing so nicely that I don't know, this plant just might stay in my corner here. I don't know if I'm actually gonna be selling it. And that's kind of the story with propagation, is I take these propagations with the best of intentions of selling, making a little bit of money back on my investments, and then I just end up with more plants. And on the other side of the incense is my Philodendron Prince of Orange. It is working on a new leaf right there. It's kind of stuck like the Cinderella slipper look, but I am excited for that to open. It hasn't had an orange leaf in like 2 weeks, and I have really been missing the orange. The orange leaves are such a nice pop of color in the back here. I love having this plant here because it just adds so much interest. And it has been popping out new leaves a lot. I did chop this plant a couple months ago, and the cuttings unfortunately didn't make it, which was really weird. That was my first time trying to propagate Prince of Orange. I thought it would be really simple to propagate, but they did not root at all. I tried in water, and then I tried in perlite, and there was absolutely no root growth at all. So apparently Prince of Orange is really difficult to propagate. However, where I chopped it here, there is new growth coming out. So at least I did prune the plant. Pruning, I think in general, is really good for your plant, even if you don't propagate everything you prune off. But I was really disappointed that those cuttings didn't make it. And over here is my Philodendron domesticum variegated, and this is the mama plant. I did chop this. I'll show you the propagation as well. This plant is so beautiful. I don't see this plant being talked about that much, but I feel like the variegation is really, really perfect and really unique. And the leaves are a really nice shape. They're kind of like this frilly arrow shape, and I really, really appreciate this plant. I did chop it to make another cutting that maybe I'll sell, although that cutting is looking really cute. And there is new growth coming out from where I chopped it, so that is great. I didn't kill the plant. I left a ton of nodes on the mama plant. And I learned from my experience with the Philodendron Dark Lord, if you keep chopping and don't let it produce some new leaves before chopping again, you are going to end up with a very juvenile plant, which is not what I want to happen with this plant. I want it to continue to size up. So I'm gonna let it grow in a little bit. I just wanted to take at least one cutting that maybe I'll sell, but again, we'll see. It looks pretty darn cute. I made this pot. Okay, we are traveling over to the cabinet area of the plant room, which is very, very exciting. I'm gonna talk about the plants that are on top of and around the cabinet before I actually go inside the cabinet. Down here is my melanochrysum, and as you can see, I have put it on a massive moss pole because I am expecting it to get absolutely huge now that it's on a moss pole. I have tons of little baby propagations in the soil. And yes, there is a ton of broken red glass in the pot. I'm not gonna talk about that, but if you watch my last video, you will know why. But I have just decided that this plant is gonna get absolutely massive and grow into one of those huge melanochrysums that you see online. It is going to fill up this entire moss pole. This grow light is going to give it enough light to size up significantly. I'm expecting that the next leaf is going to be like 5 times the size of this leaf, and it's also not gonna have the damage that this leaf has. That's what I've decided, and I will update you when that happens. Now, on top of the cabinet, I have assembled some very beautiful plants, and I love how they look against the window. I haven't had plants against this window in a very long time. It just hasn't worked with my setup of my furniture, but now we are in business. So I have my Philodendron micans here. I'm hoping that it kind of just trails down this wall of the cabinet, and maybe it will just sort of cascade down here as it grows. This plant is putting out tons of new leaves. I feel like every time I look at it, there is a new leaf. It is very happy in this pot that I made for it. And overall, I feel like this is a perfect spot for it. When the sun is going down and there's like dusk shining on this, it is so magical. So I love the micans. I feel like everyone should have a Philodendron micans. This is a new-ish micans. The one I had before was struggling big time with thrips, and I eventually gave up on it and got just another new one. And ever since then, I'm like, oh, this is how micans are supposed to be. They're supposed to grow really, really quickly. So don't get a micans with thrips. Get a healthy micans and you will be very, very happy. Here is another one of my begonia terrariums. This is a begonia maculata, as you can see. And it's just in this really weird terrarium that I got from the thrift store. It seems to like it in there. It does eventually outgrow the terrarium. I've had to snip it many times, but I mean, it looks pretty magical in there. It's the only plant I have in there, just a begonia maculata. And then whenever I prune it, I put a couple leaves back in there and seems really happy. This terrarium is probably due to be cleaned, but looks pretty good for now. This is my Philodendron tortum, and my husband got me this for Christmas this year. It hasn't put out any new growth. It had the beginning of a new leaf and then it kind of shriveled off. And now there is another leaf starting there. The root system when I repotted it was not great. So I'm thinking it's probably just working on growing its roots right now. And hopefully we will have a new leaf sometime this spring. Here is my other Ploumanii. I love how it like glows with the light behind it. This is the mama plant technically, and it did have a third leaf that was like really, really old and was damaged, and I cut it off yesterday or maybe the day before, and I kind of, can you see that little like ring in there? I think that was the beginning of another leaf, so I probably should have waited to cut that off, but it was really damaged and kind of was on its way out, so it's okay. And then we also have this beautiful leaf that is basically perfect. Both of these leaves are basically perfect. That's probably why the other leaf was bugging me so much, is this plant was basically flawless. It's growing out from this area. I don't know if these nodes are going to activate and we'll have more growth points now that I snipped off that leaf. We will see. But it's definitely very healthy and happy. Right beside is my Aglaonema, and this is actually a mixed pot. This is Lady Valentine, and then down here is Siam or Aurora Aglaonema. And these ones grow so much slower than the Pink Valentine. I find that really interesting. I don't know if I'm gonna keep them mixed like this. I feel like they kind of look weird because they grow at different rates. But we'll see. For now, they seem pretty happy together. I had this plant in my bathroom for the longest time, getting really, really low light. And then when I rearranged the plant room, I decided to put this here. And now I feel like I look at it so much more as the light kind of comes through the leaves. I really appreciate it a lot more. So I'm gonna leave it here. We'll see if it grows faster too. This is the propagation of the Philodendron domesticum. So as you can see, it really does not have a lot of variegation. This leaf has a lot of variegation, but the newer leaves does not. But the newer leaves do not have a ton of variegation. This leaf just opened up. And the variegation on the domesticum is like a Polaroid variegation, so it comes in slowly. But all of these leaves, I mean, these two have been out for a long time and there's no variegation. So that was another reason I chopped it, is just to make sure it didn't revert. I'm hoping though that this leaf does show a little bit of variegation. We'll see. I don't really see, like sometimes you can see the beginning of it. This might be a little bit of variegation. It's hard to know really with the Polaroid variegation because sometimes it just looks like shading and then sometimes it just isn't there. Hoping with this new leaf, there's like a new leaf gonna come very soon. I hope that that one has a little bit more variegation. We can hope. And over here is my Philodendron Ring of Fire. She's just a little baby, but she's very, very cute. Look at this new leaf that she just put out. She's so cute. I'm trying to give her lots of light here so that she keeps up her variegation. This plant was really, really tiny when I bought it. I wasn't sure if it was gonna make it, but it was a very good deal. And Philodendron Ring of Fire seems pretty common nowadays, but I love it. I think it will be really fun to grow. I love how all the leaves are different, and we will see. And yes, I did make this pot. And then we have two terrariums here. I will take the lid off so that you can see what's going on in here. These are mostly begonias. We've got the Pilea baby tears again. Mostly begonias, a little Fittonia in there. And these are mostly begonia babies. We've got a little Peperomia frost there. These are mostly begonias that I've grown from leaf propagations. This guy's growing really well. I think this is Begonia Zumba, but honestly, begonias are really hard to identify, especially when you buy them and they don't have an ID. And then I recently put this leaf in here and this leaf in here. These are new begonias that I recently acquired. They are in the cabinet. I'm going to show you in a moment. But I recently got them and thought I should start some babies in the terrarium. I love this terrarium. It is so fascinating to look at. I recently cut back a lot of the begonias. It was really, really full. But I cut them back and then the baby leaves come in. I really love baby begonia leaves. I feel like they are so perfect and iridescent and weird. They're usually a little bit hairier and more iridescent than the more mature leaves, which is really, really cool to look at. And then next door is a jewel orchid. I forget what this one is called. It's a black jewel orchid. And this one hasn't put out a ton of new growth recently, but I'm hoping that this spring, I feel like I've said that about every single plant. I hope that this spring brings some new growth, but we will see. But it's definitely alive and doing well. I remember when I first learned about jewel orchids, I really wanted one, but I thought that there was no way I could keep it alive. And then I started getting into terrariums and realized that jewel orchids are just terrarium plants. So I got one as soon as I could. And then beside the cabinet is my beautiful Philodendron Rojo Congo. I love this plant. I feel like everyone should have one. It is so satisfying to grow. It is always putting out a new leaf. It is so hardy. It doesn't need super bright light, even though it is getting bright light now. I have grown it in really low light conditions and it just does really, really well. I like to keep the leaves really clean because they look so much prettier. But other than that, it just grows and is a very low maintenance plant overall. Onto the inside of the cabinet, I'll just show you what my greenhouse cabinet looks like from the outside because honestly, I am really proud of it. This was a DIY project. It's going really, really well so far. I've had it for about 2 years. You can see the little pink fans, which keep the air moving. And then I recently switched the grow lights out. I had some cooler white grow lights and they died, and I switched to warm white grow lights. I feel like it looks so much more beautiful and my plants are thriving in there. So let's open it up and have a look. First up is an Alocasia silver dragon baby, which I grew from a corm that I found in my big Alocasia silver dragon. I have found that growing Alocasias in a cabinet is the way to go, at least in my house. My house is not very humid, it's pretty dry, and they thrive in the cabinet. Whereas outside of the cabinet, they do okay, they stay alive, but they usually don't get past 2 leaves. Whereas in the cabinet, they are doing great. So I'll show you some other Alocasia I have in here. This is my Alocasia Black Velvet. And yes, this one is down to 2 leaves. It just had a big bloom come out, which I chopped off. I feel like the blooms on Alocasia attract a lot of pests. There is another baby shoot coming out. This plant was up to 4 leaves last spring, and then I took it out of the cabinet briefly and it lost all its leaves. And so now we're down to 2, but that's okay. I have really high hopes for it growing back. And even with the 2 leaves, they are both really, really big and healthy, and I really can't complain. Next up is my Alocasia dragon scale, and this plant is absolutely mesmerizing. It's like an alien. I love this plant a lot. I find it interesting that the different leaves have different coloring. I don't know if that's just because it's not a very mature plant. I'm not sure. This plant is doing really well, and there's always tons of new leaves coming out. So I haven't wanted to repot it, but it is due for a repot. And I am kind of thinking that a lot of these baby leaves are maybe coming from some corms that just got activated recently, because they aren't at all at the same maturity as some of the other leaves. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but it is growing. It's really happy. I am in love with it. Basically, I'm in love with all my Alocasia. I'm gonna say that over and over. I am very happy to baby them in this cabinet, even though I know that they would be okay outside of the cabinet. Alocasia, I would say, is probably my favorite plant genus right now, and it has been for a while. I love all my plants, but Alocasia just, I don't know. I would love to get more Alocasia and just fill up the cabinet with Alocasia, and who knows, that might happen. This is my Alocasia cuprea, and this hoop, I just have it kind of attached to the mirror to keep the leaves standing a little bit upright. And Alocasia cuprea is one of those plants that photographs so well, but then actually looks even better in person. I am still surprised that this is a plant that grows in my house and that it has so many leaves and that the leaves are so perfect. I've had absolutely no issue with this plant ever. And yes, I do keep it in a cabinet. I have no idea how well it would do outside of the cabinet. I think that this is actually the plant that prompted me to get a greenhouse cabinet set up. I was kind of putting it off, and then I realized that this plant would probably do way better in a cabinet. And so then I started looking through thrift stores for the perfect cabinet, and I found one pretty quickly actually. But anyway, back to the plant. This is consistently surprising. Every time it puts out a new leaf, I am surprised that it is putting out yet another new leaf, and then the new leaf is perfect. So I love this plant. It is beautiful. I hope that it continues to thrive. I hope that it continues to grow. I don't think I've even lost a leaf since growing this plant, at least not that I remember. I don't think any leaf has died, just new ones have come out, which is amazing. It is obviously really happy in the cabinet, and I am happy for it. And in the back here, I have my begonia Benigo pink, I believe is what it's called. Begonia something pink, but it is very spotty, very pink. And the back is the beautiful red color that some begonias have. This plant is absolutely thriving in the cabinet, whereas it was not doing so great outside of the cabinet. And honestly, I'm at the point where all begonias go in the cabinet or a terrarium. I am just not going to fool around with trying to grow them in my dry living room. I really do love begonias, but I had kind of given up on them because they were doing so poorly in my living room. And since discovering the terrarium and since getting a cabinet, they do really well. So I'm gonna just keep doing that and not kill any more begonias, because look at it. There is a new little baby leaf right there, which is so perfect and precious. And I am just thrilled with this plant. And this plant was a garden center find. It was actually really, really huge when I bought it, but a lot of the leaves were browning and damaged. So I cut it back to only healthy growth, and then it really, really quickly filled in my cabinet. Last plant on this side is my Anthurium crystallinum. And this plant is doing really, really well. My one concern is there is a little bit of water damage. I think it's the minerals from my water that comes out, because I don't use distilled water for my plants. I am not sure. I've tried to remove the deposits with foliar spray. That didn't work. I read online that you can use diluted vinegar or lemon juice to remove the deposits because it like breaks it down. But I am terrified to put something so acidic on my plants, even if it was really diluted. If you've tried this, please let me know. The mineral deposits don't bother me enough to risk the plant, but if it does work, then I will try it. There is a new little leaf coming out there, which is great. I am definitely new to anthuriums. I only have a few. I did have an anthurium clarinervium, which eventually got thrips and was just not thriving in the same way my crystallinum has been thriving. So I don't know, maybe it had thrips for a long time and I just didn't know about it, but it was not as happy as this one. This one just does its thing. It's happy in the cabinet. I really love the velvety leaves. This leaf has been open for several months, but it does seem still not 100% hardened off. As you can see, it's like more transparent than this one. I'm wondering if maybe that is a nutrient deficiency or something. I'm still learning. The leaf still looks healthy, but just not quite as sturdy as this one. Onto the other side, this is one of my newer begonias. This is Begonia Autumn Ember, and you can see how it gets that name. It definitely looks like autumn leaves or leaves that are on fire. It's absolutely stunning. Usually when I get a new begonia, some of the leaves die off before it really kind of gets into the groove, but so far there's been no leaf die off, which is really great. This leaf here that's kind of dying off is the mama leaf that was used to propagate the plant, so that's fine if that's dying off. I saw this plant at a nursery last year and I didn't buy it, and I've been thinking about it all year and hoping that that nursery would still have this plant when it opened up this spring, and it did. So I'm so excited to have this plant. I've been dreaming about it all year and I hope that it does as well as I want it to. Next is my Philodendron Pink Princess, and I've had this for years. As you can see, it doesn't have a ton of pink, but I've decided to put in the cabinet in the hopes that it will get more pink, and so far it has been working. The newer leaves definitely have more variegation. As you can see, this leaf just opened up and it's got like a whole pink stripe. So I don't know, a lot of people say that light doesn't affect a pink princess, that it's all genetics, but so far since having it right under the grow light and increased humidity, it does seem to be doing a lot better. It also could be that the plant is maturing. A lot of people have said that that increases the pink. As the plant matures, it gets more pink. I don't know really. I'm open to experimenting. As we all know, these plants are everywhere now. I got this plant in 2020 when it was like $60 for a tiny cutting, and I was pretty disappointed by it. But now that it's filled out quite a bit and I'm seeing more pink, I do really like it. But considering that I've been growing this for 4 years, it really isn't that big. I have cut off some of the new growth that was not as variegated. But even so, this seems like such a small plant to be growing for 4 years compared to a lot of my other philodendrons that are massive. I do find this plant fun to grow, but it's definitely not one of my treasured plants. I do get excited when there's a new leaf just to see if there's more pink on it. This leaf is really, really beautiful, but really, really tiny. I'm not overly invested in this plant. I've kind of given up on it being one of those crazy, beautiful, huge pink princesses. I'm just not overly attached to it. Next up is my Alocasia Silver Dragon. As you can see, this plant is doing super, super well. I am so glad because I've wanted this plant for quite a while. My husband got it for me for Christmas and I love it. It's put out this new leaf in my care and it is absolutely perfect. It seems to be loving the cabinet life like my other Alocasias, and I hope that it just continues to fill out and put out bigger and bigger leaves. Next up is my Hoya Chelsea, one of the few Hoyas that has remained in the cabinet. This plant I recently chopped off, and this is the propagated piece, so I rooted that and put it in. There's no new leaves on the propagation. However, the mama plant has a new leaf there and a new leaf right there. So that's very exciting. I find pruning Hoyas often leads to new growth, and that's what I was hoping to happen to this plant because it hadn't grown in a really long time. But I am happy to see that there is something still going on, and maybe we will get a little bit more growth in the coming months. Hopefully the propagation will shoot out some new growth as well. And another begonia. This is my Begonia Silver Dollar, and I have grown this plant in so many different conditions, different terrariums, etc. I'm finally now just keeping it in the cabinet and seeing what will happen. So far so good. It seems really happy. I put this in as a really tiny little cutting, and already we have some very mature leaves as well as some more medium-sized leaves. It Seems really happy. It's getting lots of light, lots of humidity. This plant is so beautiful. It has like the fuzzy stems and then the super silvery, sparkly leaves. And then the back of the leaves are red. I've had this begonia for a really long time and I've grown it in so many different settings, so many different conditions, different terrariums, and it has been so fun to watch how it adapts to different conditions. Sometimes the leaves get really big with more silver or smaller with more red, and it's just a really beautiful plant and really fun to play with. On to the bottom shelf. These are my anthurium seedlings. I grew them from seed. I think there is 4 of them in there, and these are Magnificum crossed with crystallinum crossed with self. I got the seeds from Jenna's Plants. They did really well right from the beginning. I think 1 or 2 of the seeds died off in the really small seedling phase. The seedlings just keep sizing up and up. This leaf is obviously the most mature leaf. I love how it's looking. I can't wait to see how big these get this year. Here is another new begonia to my collection. This is Begonia Rex Red Kiss. You can see why it's called a red kiss. It is red with black edges. I love the shape of the leaf. I'm not sure how bushy this plant will be. Sorry, my dog is doing acrobatics behind us. I'm not sure how bushy this plant will be. Like, will the stems get really long like the silver dollar, or will it stay more compact? This plant just looked so dramatic and romantic at the nursery. I could not resist, and I'm really interested to see how it matures, if it gets more mature, if the leaves get bigger, or if the petioles get longer. And the stems of this plant are nice and hairy as well, which I do like in a begonia. These are just some Alocasia corms. I believe these are Silver Dragon. I'm just growing them in the cabinet, and you can see all the beautiful algae that has developed around them. And last one, other than this stick, which is some Hoya, I think this might be a Hoya elliptica, I'm not sure, and I don't even know if it's alive. But other than that, my very last plant to show you is my Hoya carnosa. This plant I had to cut up. It had some root rot as well, but it is doing well. It is putting out a little bit of new growth there. The Hoya carnosa is just a really plain Hoya, but it is still so stunning. Mine has a little bit of speckling on it, and I love it. I put it in this pot after I propagated it, and I think it looks so cute. That new growth is really promising. I did think this plant was a goner when it had the root rot, but I'm really glad that I tried to save it because it is totally fine. The fact that there's new growth coming out means that I did successfully save it. And I'm so happy I did. I got this as a gift, just as a cutting, and I was so happy. I think it was one of my first Hoyas, and it did pretty well. Didn't grow too fast, which made me think it might have the flat mites, and that is why I got the sulfur treatment, and that is why I got the root rot. But here we are. It's doing well. I think it's gonna pull through, which makes me very happy. All right, friends, that is all from me for today. I hope you enjoyed the houseplant tour. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye.